Hello everybody and welcome. So this is my video for the books that I have read for the Booktube Prize 2021 fiction category, section H, the Octafinals. So for section H, I read 6 books. And I must say that I have not read any of these books, and I actually feel kind of lucky that I was able to participate in this and judge the books, because I think that these books are certainly books that I wouldn't pick up for myself anytime soon, because, well, they are new releases and I don't usually buy new releases. Maybe in a few years then I would consider buying these books and read them. But anyway, I picked them up for the prize and I read them. Overall, it was a really nice experience. In general, I think that this group is pretty lovely. It is mostly quite nice. I do have some rather not so nice things to say about certain books. So I'm going to talk about each of these 6 books, starting from the book that I like the least, all the way until the books that I like the most. So, ranking from 6 to 1. So I'm going to start with the book that I ranked at number 6, the last book, and this one is Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. Out of all of these 6 books, I think this was the only book that I say that I dislike. I gave this book 1 star, and my first impression when I read this book, when I was about halfway through this book, I was like, what is this? Basically, my main complaint about this book is not exactly because of its form. So this book is about the experiences of this one American man who works as a teacher in Bulgaria. So he has been living in Bulgaria for quite some time. So the contents of this book, it is not exactly a novel in the traditional sense where you have like a linear kind of plot or story or single story. Rather, it's like a series of experience by this man who is nameless in this book, and all of those experiences are kind of like interconnected more by themes rather than plot. And we see those experiences as some kind of vignettes. And what really connects all of those experiences is that it's about his experience with queer experience. He's a gay person, and we see different kinds of gay experience in Bulgaria, whether it is his own personal experience with people there, his own personal sexual relationship, or whether it is actually the experience of his Bulgarian friends or Bulgarian students. And I think that this book as a whole, it is you can say that it's kind of like a gay angst book. I certainly feel that angsty vibe in here, and it's very strong. So much so that I think that this book is mostly just angst than being gay. I just find it really unsatisfying that this book it takes place in Bulgaria, but it doesn't really use Bulgaria to its own advantage, if you know what I mean. Bulgaria is not really represented in a very nice way. It is not represented in a very nuanced way. Rather, you see Bulgaria being represented, being written in this kind of like lazy, broad stroke kind of manner. What my impression of Bulgaria from this book is that it is kind of like this backwards place with backward thinking, especially when it comes to the LGBT, and it's not so progressive. And overall, there's this like negative vibe about that country. And I just find it really strange that the narrator in this book also thinks that, he is an American, but he feels that he somehow belongs in Bulgaria. He, despite being a foreigner, he considers Bulgaria as his kind of like home, second home. But then I don't really feel that way reading his narration. I feel that he still has this particular prejudice on how Bulgaria is. So I think that the representation of Bulgaria here is like really negative, and it's not even really critical. It's just bad writing, I think, and also we don't really see a lot like nuanced experience of the LGBT in Bulgaria, and instead we just see a very general depiction of LGBT angst, which is just it just doesn't feel very surgical. And so I thought that this book was not a pleasurable read for me. I did not like it, so I gave it 1 star. So the next book is, now we are going to the 3 stars category. I would say that this book is quite decent. And book number 5 is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So this book is about this woman whose name is Vanessa. And she used to have this sexual relationship with a teacher when she was a teenager in a boarding school. Now, she was underage, and this teacher approached her and just kind of like took advantage of her sexually. But the thing is, Vanessa did not see it as some kind of abuse. She did not see it as some kind of manipulation, because she was not aware. She thought that she's kind of she participated in that relationship. She contributed to that relationship voluntarily. And so as a result, you have this young girl who was taken advantage of by an older member, an older man, while being underage. And she did not know it, she did not acknowledge it, and she kept denying it and justifying all the things that happened to her. So I think that this book does really well on showing that particular situation from the point of view of a victim. When I read this book, because I'm an outsider, I have my own way of seeing the situation. I certainly could see all of the red flags in the relationship that's going on in this book. I could see how the gaslighting is done. I could see how the manipulation is performed on Vanessa. But because I think perhaps, Vanessa herself, she is emotionally attached to this relationship. She was being manipulated. She couldn't see all of those things. So as a bystander, I feel this sense of frustration on this character, and I think in that sense this book is quite effective. So I think that part, I think this book really excels. I think that this book was something that I noticed when I just first started my Booktube channel. I kept seeing people talking about this book left and right, like how it is like one of their most anticipated releases. And then I was like, okay, this is like a new release, so I would probably not pick it up very soon. And then fast forward 1 year, here I am holding this book. Anyway, one thing I would like to comment about this book that didn't really wasn't really like wow is that the writing feels kind of conventional. It feels kind of monotonous. This book is a psychological fiction, so I think it would have benefited more with some kind of manipulation or playful use of language. But instead we just have this kind of like really vanilla kind of prose. It's like some kind of an online article written by a part-time writer perhaps, and a mediocre one at that. So I think in that department, this book didn't really impress me. But I think overall, content-wise, this book packs a punch. It's just that the writing did not feel as punchy. So I gave this book 3 stars. So now we're moving on to 4 stars territory. Book number 4 is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. Okay, this book, we know what time it is, right? You know, it's COVID period, and this book, it sets in 1918, which is when the Spanish flu was like all over, and this book takes place in Dublin. So we see this nurse named Julia. She's working at a hospital, and she's assigned to the maternity fever ward, where she is assigned to tend to the women who have the Spanish flu, but at the same time are due to give birth. They are all pregnant. And because the hospital was really understaffed at the time, she was assigned a person who does not have medical training or knowledge. Her name is Bridie, and Bridie is just an orphan being taken from a convent somewhere, and she was assigned to help Nurse Julia as a runner. And at the same time, Nurse Julia will also be working with a female doctor whose name is Kathleen Lynn, and she's actually an actual historical figure. So I think that's really interesting. But the main characters of this book is definitely Julia and Bridie. So as the story progresses, we see how Julia and Bridie, and also Dr. Kathleen Lynn, they deal with different patients who have to be like at the hospital, dealing with different kinds of medical conditions, but all of them have conditions related to pregnancy and also the Spanish flu. And I think that reading this book at this time, it feels really apt. So many things feel very familiar in this book, this whole pandemic thing, but I feel that that's just, a marketing move. So nothing really surprising with that, I think. But yeah, it definitely has that effect on readers, I think. So perhaps that's why a lot of people are like receiving it in a particular manner. So yeah, this book actually started out kind of flat and boring. But then, I think starting from the second half of the first chapter, the plot really gained momentum. And I think by the end of this book, the momentum is just really high. It's just pretty much rammed through all the walls. And I think, there's this crescendo kind of a tone shift, I think, which made it more exciting at the back. And we see what happens to this nurse and her runner and also all of the other patients in that ward. So overall, I think that this book has this really strong kind of a women's stories, empowerment vibe to it. I could certainly see this book being adapted to some kind of TV drama and being broadcast in, say, a Hallmark channel or somewhere. But yeah, that's definitely the vibe that I got from this book. I think overall it was a positive book, so I gave it 4 stars. It was quite a pleasurable read. And so now moving on to the top half of my list. Book number 3 is The Vanishing by Bennett. Okay. This book is very popular, and I've seen a lot of people read this book, and they all commented like many nice things about this book, and I would be inclined to agree with what they say. So this book is about this pair of twin sisters, Desiree and Stella Wind. These sisters, they come from a fictional town of Mallet, which is somewhere in the Jim Crow South. The story takes place starting sometime in the 1960s, and it goes all the way until the 1980s. So what essentially happens is that these sisters, coming from that town, populated by a community of, a black community, but the members are mostly like light-skinned black people. So one day, because these sisters felt like the town was kind of really constricting their freedom, and they were like so eager to get out, they escaped the town. They ran away from home, and then they go to New Orleans. And it is there that their path diverges. Essentially, Desiree, you can say that she chooses to live as a black woman, while Stella chooses to live as a white woman. And for me, I really like this kind of separation and potentially reunion plot that will happen later in this book, especially when it comes to, when it involves family. It really has this strong domestic fiction vibe to it, which I really love. And I feel that with this book, it really explores the idea of identity and race and colorism, especially when it comes to racism, in really nice layers and really well structured. Actually, almost makes it feels like I'm actually reading a TV series. In fact, I think that this book probably was written with a TV series in mind. I'm not sure, but that's certainly how it feels like. Like I said, I like the way that this book explores colorism. Essentially, colorism is not just something that's just black versus white, but it can even be like what? Black versus black. It is so complex, and this book really explores that. There's like so many layers of divisions in a particular society that that it makes things just quite complicated. And also how this book discusses identity, I feel that that part is a little bit on the nose. It's a little bit heavy-handed in here, especially when it comes to like how this book is probably trying to draw a parallel of identity, or how you decide your identity, to the act of acting. Because one of the characters in this book, main characters, is an actress. And, there's this whole thing about how acting is, kind of like how you show your identity and stuff like that. And also trans representation, which, I don't know. I mean, on its own, I think it's nicely done. But there seems to be an attempt to relate all of these things under one single umbrella, which I think it's probably weird. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on this book. I feel that it's nicely written, quite decent, so I give it 4 stars. And so now that leaves me with 2 books, and for these 2 books, I gave them 5 stars because they were just so great. I love them both very, very much. And for number 2, I have Big Girl Small Town by Michelle Gallen, which means that my number 1 is Parakeet by Marie-Helene Bertino, but I'm going to talk about this one first. So Big Girl Small Town, this book is about a young woman named Magella. She is in her 20s. The story takes place sometime in the 90s after the peace agreement, after the troubles in Northern Ireland has been signed. And so we see Magella living with her alcoholic mother in this kind of like sleepy, small town, a fictional town of Aggie in Northern Ireland. And we follow Magella's life in 7 days. So this book takes place in within the span of 7 days. It's really just showing the routine of what Magella does. She works at a chip shop, and she works 6 days a week, and it's all just the boring details, the mundane things that she does from day to day. But in this story, during the time when this story is happening, her grandmother just got murdered, and so that makes her week feels a little bit more different. And we see how that affects Magella in small ways, because not only Magella has some kind of emotional connection, she really loves her grandmother, but the fact that her grandmother was killed, and she lives in a small town, means that every single person in the town knows about that. So in general, I feel that this story, it really captures this sense of claustrophobic almost, how it feels to live in a small town. But that's not all. We also see how Magella is as a person. She might look really unremarkable from the outside, but we get to know so many of her thoughts in here. Like, there are so many instances where we see how the history of the place she lives, the history of Ireland, really affects her family. Like, her father is missing, and her father is missing because, possibly because of his involvement during the conflicts at that time. And it really, just shake things up in Magella's life, and we see the aftermath of that. And we also see different things that she reminisces about in her past, how she approaches family, and also her own wants and needs. Magella is definitely a character with great sense of agency in this book. So yeah, I think that this book is just really awesome. It's just really awesome. Okay. So, the book that I put in number 1 is Parakeet by Marie-Helene Bertino. I don't have the physical book with me because I ordered that book from Book Depository at the end of January, actually, before I started reading for the Booktube Prize books. But it still hasn't arrived. Now it's already 3rd of April. So I only read it from the ebook, and it was great. This book is just, it's psychedelic, it's wild, it's spectacular, it's really, really crazy. So essentially what happens in this book is that we see this character, a bride who is going to have her wedding. She's preparing for her wedding, actually. So she's staying at an inn on Long Island, and she is she's quite ambivalent when it comes to this wedding, and we later see why she feels that way about her wedding and her marriage. Essentially, she probably thinks that this wedding is going to change things for her. So what happens at the beginning of this book is, while she's at her room, a bird comes in, and apparently the bird is actually her dead grandmother. And her dead grandmother tells her not to go through with this wedding, and tells her also to find her brother and reconcile with him. And of course, we see this bride responding to that in a way that is pretty much filled with reluctance, but it also sets in motion a series of events that the bride has to deal with. And I actually didn't know how this book was going to move forward, but then as I read it, you know, it just started to gain more and more momentum. So many crazy things happen. I don't really want to tell what those crazy things are because I feel that that is kind of like spoilery. But I think I can also tell some of the things that happen because, you know, some of the things that happen are kind of described in certain versions of the blurb. Like the bride also finds herself in the body of her mother, so that's crazy. What else? I think that was the only one that I see constantly being mentioned in other versions of blurb. So, yeah, you certainly have the bride, you know, getting herself into that particular situation, and this book is it's really strong when it comes to character development. And that's certainly something that I really love. And also, the protagonist of this story is a 30-year-old woman. And I don't know, for some reason, I have this strong resonance with books that feature a 30-year-old, you know, 30-ish something woman who gets herself into weird, messy, awkward situations. For some reason, I really like that kind of books, you know. And this book fits that mold really well. And, you know, it almost feels like this book was written for me, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, Parakeet is an awesome book. I put it at number 1. And it's, I don't know, it's probably one of my all-time favorites now. And I'm so happy to have read this book, so happy to have read for Section H, because otherwise I wouldn't have discovered this book in the first place. I actually never heard of this book before. And so, as for the results, my top 2 books did not make it to the next round. So that was kind of disappointing, but anyway, I was really lucky to have, you know, to be able to read this book, and so overall it was really nice. I'm not judging for the next round, maybe for the round after that or the finals, who knows. That's all for my thoughts on the books that I read for Section H Octafinals of the Booktube Prize Fiction category, and I'll see you again in the next video. So until then, take care, thanks for watching, and bye.